Mr.
Thank
Cohen.
you. I appreciate your leading this hour. It was just last week that the President stood just behind where you're standing and addressed this Congress, bipartisan, bicameral, senators, House members, and laid out a plan to put America to work and to fix this economy. Pass this bill, he said, and we need to pass the bill. The President and his team have put a lot of work into it, and people want jobs. They want to work. In my district, there are more unemployed. Every weekend when I go out in my district, people come up to me and tell me that they've either been looking for a job, have lost their job, looking for a job. We need to find ways to put those people to work. Working on making schools better, building infrastructure that's so important to Memphis, Tennessee, where we have rails, roads, rivers, and runways. Distribution center of America is so important. And if you put the money in infrastructure, which this plan plans on, make it in America, you do it in infrastructure, it's got to be made in America. You can't export those jobs overseas. Then you put people to work immediately, but what they're building are avenues that make commerce move and work. Federal Express moves more packages around the world than any other American company, and Memphis International Airport is the largest American cargo airport in the world. We create jobs by putting money into infrastructure. Teachers, policemen, and firemen, 3 million kept their jobs because of the recovery bill that we passed that did successfully help this country stay out of a Great Depression. You know, sometimes, Mr. Garamendi, I'm amazed at the rhetoric that you hear from some people, particularly on the other side, who blindly tell people that the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was $770 billion that didn't make a difference. The fact is, 40% of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, so as to pass the Senate where we needed Senator Collins and Senator Snow's votes, were the Republican proposed, endorsed, and loved tax cuts. How can they talk out of both sides of their mouths and say that a bill that 40% of which means over about $300 billion of tax cuts, didn't do any good? Because now all they talk about is tax cuts. But when the President of the United States proposes and the Congress with him in a bipartisan effort passes tax cuts, and I'm not sure the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was bipartisan, that was strictly Democrat. But when we passed tax cuts with a few Republicans in the Senate, it didn't create any jobs in their mind. But when they proposed tax cuts, this is Christopher Columbus's new way to find the new world. Well, it's hypocritical. We need to support our president because he is the president. There isn't a red America and a blue America. There is, as he said in the speech in the 2004 Democratic Convention, the United States of America. And people need to understand that. We need to be here for that red, white, and blue flag for this country, to put this country back to work, to keep it as the most competitive country in the world, so we don't fall behind China and India in engineering and science, and coming up with programs that give our children an opportunity to be able to fill the jobs of the 21st century. The green jobs that the President's proposed, that are the jobs of the 21st century, and the technology jobs that we haven't done a good enough job in filling. Giving money to colleges to do the research for industry, to create jobs. In our caucus yesterday, we had Joseph Stiglitz, a Nobel Prize winning economist. I read Krugman a lot, Nobel Prize winning economist. Both say basically the same thing. The austerity programs proposed by the other side don't work. They've used them in Japan, didn't work. Greece, England, didn't work, unless you're in the upper 1%. If you wear a crown and you're the queen or the prince or the leaders of whatever, it works. But in this country, we don't have that kind of royalty. But we're starting to have a separate society with the upper 1%, who the Republican Party won't raise their taxes no matter what, and the rest of the country. Well, the President's right. We need to think about the whole country. We need to come together as a United States of America, not a red, a blue, a Democrat, or a Republican, and create jobs. The President's plan includes over half of it is tax cuts. And our colleagues on the other side of the aisle say, well, we can go for what we like there, even though they said it didn't work when the President and the Democrats passed it in the Recovery Act, but they can't go for the infrastructure jobs. That, of course, help businesses, trucking businesses, airline industries, transportation industry, automobiles trucks have to have highways. So we need to pass this, and I support the President. I took an oath, do what I could to make this country better. We need to come together now because this is a crisis time.
Mr. Cohen, thank you so very much. And your experience from the great Midwest along America's great river is really important for us to understand. We really have an opportunity here right now. This legislation is before Congress and the Senate, and we have an opportunity for a better deal for America. It's an investment in America. We talked about the infrastructure. That's an investment that will last for 50, 100 years because it's in the ground. It's the roads, the sanitation system. It's also a critical investment in tomorrow's workers, in our children. The American Jobs Act has money for 280,000 teachers. 280,000 teachers will be able to stay on the job. Right now in California, teachers are getting laid off, as they are in most other states of this nation. That means that classroom sizes are going up. That means that the educational opportunity for our children is diminishing. We have no more important investment. Roads are important, bridges are important, but the most important investment of all in any society, in any economy, is the investment in education, in the children, in tomorrow's workforce. 280,000 teachers will be able to stay in the classroom. This money flows directly to the school districts. Not a big administrative task at all, but one that goes there directly. Small businesses. Our Republican colleagues love to talk about small businesses. And they say correctly, most jobs are created by small business. That's true. That's accurate. 64% of the new jobs over the past 15 years created by small businesses. But what are they doing for small businesses? Cutting the contracts that the small businesses depend upon as they push an austerity budget. The American Jobs Act takes a different path. And it tells small businesses, you get an immediate tax break. 3.1% of your payroll tax will be eliminated in the next year. That's a lot of money, and I'll explain how much it is. And in addition to that, if you hire a long-term unemployed worker, your entire payroll tax will disappear. Let me tell you what that means. Let's take a warehouse. You got warehouses in your area? You talked about roads and trains and the like.
We got lots of warehouses.
Lots of warehouses. They're full of
goods ready to go on Federal Express planes to service the rest of this nation. It all starts in Memphis, Tennessee, and goes out from there. I thought they might
have some of that Tennessee whiskey in them. Some of that too, huh?
That too.
So anyway, a warehouse with a payroll last year of $7 million that this year hires 40 new workers. It would add $2 million to its payroll. It would get a full refund of the 6.2% payroll taxes paid on the $2 million of payroll. How much is that? That's $124,000 that goes immediately to the bottom line of that warehouse. And in addition to that, they've already seen a 3.1% reduction. Actually, it's a 50% reduction in their payroll tax for the workers that were already there. And that's another $155,000. So we're looking here at $279,000 of reduced expenses, taxes to that company. That means that they can improve the warehouse. That means they could expand. That means that they could even hire more workers. This is in the President's American Jobs Program, specifically for small businesses. Listen up, America. Listen up, businesses out there. There is an opportunity here for you to immediately expand your business, reducing your payroll taxes, hiring new workers, bringing a new worker on that's been long-term unemployment, and pay no payroll taxes for the next year. This is very, very important and very big, and it's immediately available as soon as the leadership, the Republican leadership in this House, brings the American Jobs Bill to the floor. Mr. Cohen, if you'd like to carry on here, I know you have some more thoughts.
Well, just the whole prospect, jobs is so important. I was thinking back about Stiglitz, and I think you were there at the caucus, and he and Krugman say the same thing, that there's several ways you can get yourself out of this deficit. He went back a little bit of history, and how during the Clinton years, we'd had a big deficit from the Reagan-Bush years, and that President Clinton, with a bill that was passed in this Congress with all Democrat votes in about 1994, I believe it was, or 93, somewhere 94, I think, put us on a road that balanced the budget and got us a surplus. Got us a surplus by the time President Clinton left office. And Stiglitz said, which is so true, it's a fact. It's a factoid. The surplus was lost because two wars, one of which was a volunteer war, not related to 9/11, Iraq, and Afghanistan, that were both passed through these Congresses, which were Republicanly controlled, Republican Congresses, without being funded. And then the Bush tax cuts, giving the wealthiest people the largest tax cuts and contributing to the largest disparity in wealth that we've ever had in this nation. Now, the wealthy can only spend so much. There are only so many Chanel purses a woman can buy. There are only so many Rolex watches a guy can have. And there's just so much. But we are losing a middle class. And because we put all this wealth through these tax cuts on the richest, making their tax rates to the lowest since the 1950s, and then extended for 2 years the inheritance tax to where the wealthy get to keep more and more in perpetuity, the middle class is disappearing in this country. Jobs are being shipped overseas. Taxes stay high on them. They're living paycheck to paycheck. They've got their children in school. Pell Grants are endangered. They almost were reduced in the last month or two, but we salvaged them in the final bill. People are having trouble making ends meet, and the middle class has got to be there to be a consumer group. If you don't have consumers, you can't have an economy to service people who are making goods and services. You've got to have a customer. We're losing the customer base. We can ship all the jobs we want off to Southeast Asia and China, where they don't pay any salaries and don't give any benefits, but those people aren't our market. And if our people can't buy goods, then we're not going to have any manufacturing base and the opportunity to make it in America. So we've got to build up the middle class. We've got to produce jobs, and we've got to see to it that the middle class is given priority and not the richest 1%. The president's plan, which is so great, is it's all paid for. It's paid for, but paid for by a tax that's appropriate for the people who can afford it. Tell us how we can deal with that and keep this as a paid-for program.
I've been kind of shuffling the boards down here because you went through several subjects along the way, and each one is so terribly important and pertinent to the issue. But I think I could wrap it all up in this, and that is America lost about 50% of its manufacturing jobs in the last 20-25 years. We went from 21 million manufacturing jobs to just over 10 million today. But we can once again rebuild the American manufacturing sector. That's where the middle class jobs are. You talked about tax policy, that the tax policy has shifted from one that was broad-based in which the wealthy and everybody participated in it in a progressive mechanism in which now the wealthy, and Warren Buffett has said it so very well, he actually pays a lower tax rate than does his secretary. And he said this is wrong, this is upside down and wrong, and he's quite correct. But if we take a look at the manufacturing sector of America and we apply a couple of principles, that is, we're going to buy American. And this has to do with our policies of all of these policies here. Trade policies, we've been giving it away in these international trade deals. On the taxes, just talked about that. The tax burden is shifted from the wealthy down to the middle class, further eroding the purchasing power and the status of the middle class. So much so that today's, just yesterday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics came out with a report that the poverty level in America has reached the highest level in 52 years. That's the pushing down of the American middle class so that those at the bottom have been pushed out of the middle class into poverty.
One out of six adults. Think about that. 1 out of 6 adults. Now, this body, of which I am extremely proud to be a member of, is not representative of America. Because if it was, 1 out of 6, or 74 people, would be earning $22,000 a year or less for a family of 4. So that doesn't happen. 1 out of 5 children in this country is now living in poverty. They're in my district, and people can't get along without having a job.
Exactly right. 22 million children living in poverty, not knowing where their next meal is going to come from. And at the same time, they're cutting the food programs. Oh, this is our program. This is the President's program. Every one of the things that is in the American Jobs Act is here. Taxes, there are tax breaks for businesses, and this entire program is paid for by ending the giveaway of our tax money to the oil companies. $4 billion a year, $40 billion over the next decade of our tax money going to support the oil industry, the wealthiest industry in the world.
How about the hedge fund guys? You know, there's another Steve Cohen. There's the one in New York that's got all the money, the hedge fund guy, billions and billions of dollars. What does he pay on his income?
Well, he pays 15%. Somehow or the other, they got into the law, the hedge fund folks that are making hundreds of millions of dollars or a year, and in some cases billions, are paying 15% on their income. Now, they got it classified as capital gains when in fact it is it is their labor, that is their work, as you and I are working here or as people are working in the manufacturing plants. It's their work, but it's taxed at 15%, not at 35 or 38%. You know, what's that all about? Well, we're going to end that tax break, and that's about $17 billion a year.
Right.
Excuse me, over 10 years.
Yeah, and that shouldn't exist. I mean, that's absurd. There's another Steve Cohen, the magician, and apparently he had something to do with the tax code when they took care of the other Steve Cohen.
So taxes are part of it. The energy policy, we haven't talked about that. We've talked about labor, putting men and women back to work. And the education system, 280,000 new teachers in the classroom, research and infrastructure. This is part of the Make It in America agenda, which can be carried out with the American Jobs Act. So if we pass the American Jobs Act, we've got a really good opportunity to once again make things in America, because the legislation calls for about $50 billion in infrastructure and another establishment of an infrastructure bank for sanitation, water systems, internet, high-speed cable systems, all of those kinds of things in the infrastructure bank. So we may be looking at $60–70 billion a year of investment in these infrastructure projects, and coupled with that is a Buy America, Make It in America, buy American-made buses, American-made locomotives. The concrete and steel in the bridges, that's going to be American-made. I could tell you one of the greatest horror stories about infrastructure. It's right in San Francisco, just outside my district, the San Francisco Bay Bridge. A multi-billion-dollar rebuilding of the Bay Bridge because it falls down in an earthquake. Did once, we don't want it to happen again. Multi-billion dollars. The contract to save 10% went to Chinese steel companies. All of the steel manufacturing in that bridge comes from China. Thousands of jobs in China, and to make things worse, the inspectors were done over there and they didn't do a good job. And beyond that, when the bridge parts came over here, Chinese workers came with the bridge. No more of that. We're going to make it in America. I've got a bill in, others are working on this, and that is, if it's American taxpayer money, by God, it's going to be used to buy American taxpayer goods and services. We can do this. And the first step is the American Jobs Act.
Well, and you mentioned on there, I look at your chart, education, part of the American Jobs Act is to rebuild our schools and to go to work and make them structurally and also energy efficient. And when you look at labor, it's work. But the labor movement's been attacked all over this country. And it's labor who's created the middle class and seen to it that they got good jobs and good opportunities and wages and benefits. In my community, we just had a grocery store taken over by a large national grocery store, took out a grocery store from another city that had come in and taken over some local owners. The people who'd worked there, one man had worked there for 44 years. He'd been making $9.85 an hour and working 40 hours a week. They came in and said, you can work 16 hours, you'll get $7.50 an hour, you won't get your benefits that you had accumulated, and you'll go to another store. He quit. They did a lot of employees that way. What happened yesterday, help inform me, because I heard this and it was difficult to believe. Bank America, what did they do? Did they make something like $7 billion last year? And how many people did they lay off yesterday?
They're talking about laying off 40,000 people across America in the next year.
So how does that jive with what we hear from the other side about just trust business to hire people, that the jobs come from business and the private sector? They're making $7.8 billion. They benefited from the TARP, a bipartisan President Bush, Secretary Paulson plan that I supported in a bipartisan manner, that we kept Bank of America alive. I think they're on the hook maybe in some federal recent action considering their loans and all, but $7 billion, and they're laying off 30 to 40,000 people. Those people are going to need unemployment benefits, and it's not because they don't want a job. They've been put out, and a lot of qualified, good people who can do jobs and are intelligent and don't have jobs because they're not there. But the people at the top are making more money than ever. They're eating at Masa in New York. They're eating the $500 dinner at the Japanese restaurant and not thinking twice about it. And they're firing people right and left. The limousines are still moving. The wealthy are still doing whatever they've been doing. They got their jets. They're not the football team, the private jets. They're living great. But the American dream is disappearing. And the American dream disappeared for my grocery workers. It's disappearing for Bank of America employees. It's disappearing for a lot of people.
Well, the American public, through the TARP program, bailed out Wall Street, bailed out the banks. And the banks have done nothing. The big Wall Street banks have done nothing except enrich themselves at the expense of the American taxpayer. Those days should be over. We need to move in a different direction. One of the groups we really need to help are those men and women that have been fighting the wars. Now, my personal view is that the war in Afghanistan ought to stop tomorrow. We ought to bring that $120 billion a year that we're spending in Afghanistan, bring it back here, invest it in America, in education, in bridges, infrastructure, and debt relief. $120 billion a year in Afghanistan. And we're still spending a vast amount of money in Iraq. End those wars, bring that money home, bring the soldiers home. And when we do, we're bringing home a lot of wounded Americans. Wounded Americans who need our respect and who need jobs. In the American Jobs Act, is a special place for veterans. Special advantage. They deserve it. They're the ones that have sacrificed. They're the ones that took time out of their lives to fight those wars. Whatever we may think about those wars, we can only think good thoughts and honor the veterans. And here's a way to do it. There are 877,000 unemployed veterans in America today. Nearly 1 million. 877,000 looking for work. In the American Jobs Act, there is a very special tax credit available to any employer who hires a veteran. You can reduce your taxes by $5,600. Right off the bottom, $5,600 tax credit. Not a deduction, but a credit. And if you happen to hire one of those wounded vets, we know them. We've seen their pictures. We know what post-traumatic stress syndrome is all about. Hire a wounded vet, and it's a $9,600 tax credit to every employer, whomever it happens to be across this nation. Now that's what we need to do. All the talk about balancing the budget, all the talk about a deficit hasn't put one person to work in America. In fact, it has laid off hundreds of thousands of people. We need to put America back to work. The American Jobs Act does that, and it does it in a very special way for those Americans that have been out there sacrificing in Iraq, in Afghanistan. It gives them an opportunity. It gives every employer an incentive to hire those workers. We owe it to these men and women. And when these men and women go back to work, they become taxpayers. And when men and women in America go back to work and become taxpayers, then the deficit will be resolved. Then we will solve the deficit. We need to make cuts. We need to do those things. But those are in the out years. Right now it is about jobs. The President has given us the legislation. The question for our Republican leadership here, they control this House. They're the ones that set the agenda. They're the only ones that can bring a bill to the floor. When will you bring the American Jobs Act to this floor so that we can put Americans back to work? Mr. Cohen, I know how deeply you feel about this. I know that in your district, your people that you represent are hurting. They want jobs. We're going to wrap this up in just a few moments, so our closing remarks and we'll
Thank you, Mr. Garamendi. Every weekend I'm home. And the weeks that I'm home, because we're home many weeks now, and this Congress doesn't work very much. We spend a lot of time at home, and that's a beautiful thing for us, but not a great thing for America, because we need to be here working on trying to get a jobs bill passed, which hadn't been introduced by the majority yet. But Professor Stiglitz talked about the causes of the loss of the surplus that President Clinton and the Democratic Congress got in the late part of the 20th century. It was the two wars, voted for by this Congress, supported by President Bush, the Bush tax cuts, passed by this Congress, proposed by President Bush, and Medicare Part D, President Bush's Medicare plan to take care of the insurance companies. That's what did it. Those were the causes. The veterans, Professor Stiglitz, and he's got a lady who works with him, I think her name is Linda Bilmes, and they've studied what it's going to cost in America in the years to come with the veterans. Now, the ones we can employ, we need to employ. But the ones that come back, 1 to 2% are going to come back disabled. And they're going to need veteran services and going to need money the rest of their lives. So these wars, particularly the Iraq War, President Bush and the Republican Congress's war, is going to cost this country for another 70 years at minimum. 70 years. And we need to be prepared for that. We need to come together. And there's no question that when, as Professor Stiglitz said, when you can borrow money at like 1 or 2% and make a greater percentage on it, this is the time that you borrow because rates are so low. Economics and the top people in economics say this whole idea of the austerity and the cut is wrong. What does it do? It helps the wealthy because they're immune to it. They're benefit from the low-cost labor they get overseas and the salaries they get here. They get great tax rates. Helps them. But what else does it help? It helps what Senator McConnell said was the number one job of this Congress the first day after President Obama was elected, to defeat President Obama. That's what Senator Mitch McConnell said was the number one priority that he had. And he's a focused man. I admire him for the fact that he gets an issue and he stays on it and he's focused. And he thought that and thinks that when he works on debt ceiling, when he works on the deficit, when he works on the American Jobs Act. It's all about one thing. Not employing Americans, but taking one American, two Americans, Barack Obama and Joe Biden, and making them unemployed. That's not appropriate.
Well, we have a different view here. I'm confident that the President will be reelected because he understands very clearly that we need to put Americans back to work. And he's given us the American Jobs Act, complete legislation. All the sections are there, all the writing is done, all the legal work is done. It is now before the United States Congress and the Senate, and it's up to us, 435 of us in this House. Are we ready to act? Are we ready to do what Americans want us to do? And that is to put them back to work.
Pass the bill.
Pass the bill. Pass the bill, put Americans back to work. I'm going to quickly go through some of the parts of this bill and the way in which they affect Americans. It's about investment. Investing in our infrastructure. $50 billion directly available for the transportation sector. Rail, high-speed rail, intercity rail, bridges, roads. $50 billion available this year to put men and women back to work repairing our transportation infrastructure. Another $10 billion for an infrastructure bank in which the pension funds of America, the public pension funds, could invest in perhaps another $20 or $30 billion in that infrastructure bank to once again augment the development of the infrastructure that we need, water systems, sanitation systems, all of those communication systems that we desperately need. That's on the infrastructure side. On the education side, repairing our schools. 35,000 schools to be repaired, repainted. Classrooms, science laboratories, as well as the playgrounds. 35,000 schools out there. Your neighborhood school. The opportunity for it to have a new paint job, a new bathroom, whatever's needed. And 280,000 teachers. 280,000 teachers. You could fill the entire stadium in Ann Arbor, Michigan, football, 100,000, and still have a third game with only 80,000 people in it. 280,000, think of it. The Ann Arbor, Michigan stadium filled 2.8 times over. Teachers in the classroom. This is exciting. Veterans. And a very powerful incentive where a business can reduce its tax burden. That is the bottom line tax reduced by $9,600 when you hire a disabled veteran. That man, that woman's going back to work, becoming a taxpayer. Once again, pride in our nation. This is powerful. For the unemployed, an extension of unemployment benefits, and we didn't even get to that today. And all of this in the context of rebuilding the American manufacturing sector. More than 10 million American manufacturing jobs have been lost in the last 2 decades. We can put them back to work if we use our public policy. Use our tax money that's going to build those bridges, those roads, buses, and locomotives. Use our tax money to buy American-made equipment. All it takes is a law, and it works. Sacramento, California, near where I live, has built, or Siemens, a German company, has built a major manufacturing plant in Sacramento, California to manufacture light rail cars and Amtrak locomotives. Why did they do that? They did that because the American Recovery Act, the stimulus bill that our Republican colleagues like to trash, said that the money for transportation systems, buses, light rail, and trains, must be spent on American-made equipment. So Siemens said, well, if that's the law, we want the business. They built the plant. And they're manufacturing light rail cars and locomotives today in America, using American equipment, using American workers. That's what we can do if we are willing to pass the laws to make it in America. Photovoltaic systems, wind turbines, all of these things supported with our tax dollars. Why not use those tax dollars to buy American-made solar cells and wind turbines? The President has given us the opportunity to do what we should do as representatives of the American people. Put Americans back to work. Pass the American Jobs Act. Pass the American Jobs Act. Mr. Cohen, wrap this up for us.
I just thank you, Mr. Garamendi, for the leadership and putting this hour together and allowing me to join you. And let's say it together. Pass the bill.
Pass the bill. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.